Kind of guilt was luck guilt, and this was guilt that close to accident guilt, but this is you might say, the more generic case of survival or survivor guilt. It's the guilt of, I'm standing here, you're standing there, you get blown up and I don't. I come home integral, you come home with no legs. Where I'm supposed to take care of you, I'm supposed to get you off the battlefield, I'm supposed to bring you home. And it doesn't always work out like that. And I heard this very profoundly in a voice in Annapolis. It was, at the time, Major Mike Mooney. He's now a lieutenant colonel, and he got this book and immediately replied back and said, I'm putting it in my kit to go to Afghanistan. So he's still in one of these, this is his nth deployment in a war that, I mentioned this to an academic audience the other day. I teach students 18 to 22, so my colleagues are here. If you think about it, we're teaching kids who have seen war for 10 years. That's more than half of their life. And so it's no surprise that when we have classes that touch on war, they're interested, and they're sitting next to veterans. The GI Bill is in force, not as great as it ought to be, but it's there. And at Georgetown, there's a Hoya battalion that's sending kids out right now. So these are not academic issues, merely academic issues. They're very close to the heart of the community, of the psychological community of Georgetown, and part of healing the civilian academic gap, which is just enormous still. So one of the Marines at Annapolis had really a remarkably powerful experience. So he's in Nasiriyah in May 23rd, 2003, where he took catastrophic losses in his unit. 80 were killed and another 80 were injured. And there's a triple whammy. That happened just after his unit was sent to clean up a horrible attack on the 507th Maintenance Company convoy. That's of Jessica Lynch fame. And 2 months later, this unit is sent back to the same area. So 3 times exposed. We're in the 3rd time now. So the battalion's back to Nasiriyah for peace and stability operations, and he says the troops are really jittery about the carnage. I remember driving into the city from the north this time, almost flinching, bracing as we're going down Ambush Alley, because I was seeing the charred marks on the road where we lost Amtraks, the amphibious tractors, catastrophic kills where every Marine in that Amtrak was killed in action. And then there's this battalion-wide memorial service, and thank goodness we're having them right away as opposed to very delayed, as was the case in Vietnam. And then Major Mooney gets an order to go back to Annapolis, and he has no time for kind of decompression or to change gears. And he says that when you see folks in the airport coming off planes, this is how it feels from inside. They look like they're maybe sleepwalking or stolid or stoic, but this is, he says, I didn't have the same experience or opportunity as the other Marines leaving the combat zone. I had orders to report back to the Naval Academy. I had to get there quickly or I wasn't going to be able to execute those orders. It was around May 15, so as my unit's backloading, moving down to Kuwait, I caught a plane, got into Kuwait City, thrown into British Airs, on my way through Frankfurt, 7 hours after being in Iraq. He says, I'm in Frankfurt, and then he says, I'm in National Airport, excuse me, ma'am, he says, Reagan National Airport, and he says, it's surreal. He says, because I'm looking, it wasn't decompression time. I was going to meet my family and my wife-to-be. Basically, I just had to start at the academy. It's boom, boom, boom. And so I pause for a second. I just say, were you okay with the transition? And without missing a beat, he says, yes, ma'am. And then he quiets down for a minute. He says, ma'am, just for me personally, I don't think there's a day goes by that I don't think about those times, just because of the accomplishments we achieved and the incredible loss of potential for the Marines. And that's a catchword, a catchphrase I heard over and over again. The loss of potential. It's distanced, it's safe, but it means all the carnage of his buddies. And then he says, with almost steel-like comportment, he starts to let down his hair a little bit, and he says, I'm getting ready to go back, and he's telling his wife, and his new wife, and he says, I say, you got to prepare yourself, because after we're going to be sitting here in Annapolis for 3 years, after wonderful air conditioning in Annapolis, while my brothers and sisters have been out in their second and third tours, you need to come to grips with the fact that I'm going back. And he is going back, and this is one deployment later than another one. So as I was listening to him, perhaps others have heard this, in my ear I heard Sassoon, I heard Siegfried Sassoon, the World War I great poet and captain, who had met Bertrand Russell, who was a pacifist, and Siegfried Sassoon had leanings at that time. He didn't think the war was any longer justified, and he was conflicted. And so his good friend Robert Graves says, you better get yourself into a psychiatric hospital, otherwise you're going to be court-martialed and executed, as was the custom in Britain at the time. Malingering could lead to execution. And he gets himself into a hospital, a psychiatric hospital, treated by a Freudian, W.H. Rivers, a famous physiologist, all sort of chronicled nicely in the Barker trilogies. And he says, I have to go out to my troops. He says that he hears them, when are you coming out to me? He says, let me just find his quote here, I'm banished from the patient men who fight, they smote my heart to pity. I hear them calling to me, when are you coming out to me again? So that feeling of betrayal of solidarity, and not deserving the luck, not uncommon in a kind of survivor luck in families when one succeeds, another doesn't, described in some of the literature.